Good afternoon. I hope you enjoyed your meal. And this short video regarding the background of environmental justice in the United States in the experience of this county, Warren. Before we begin our next segment, we would like to ask you again to respond to the following survey, which appears on the screens. The results will be provided to you at the conclusion of the next segment. I am now pleased to introduce Vincent R. Nathan, Chairman of the National Advisory Committee, and Austin Nunez, Chairman of the Governmental Advisory Committee, who will give us a report on the important work that they are doing. Both of them are virtual. Vincent and Austin?
Hello. There I am. Okay, thank you. First, I'd like to acknowledge the JPAC for inviting the NAC and the GAC to your meeting here in Wilmington, North Carolina. My name is Vincent Nathan, and I'll be introducing Austin Nunez in a couple of minutes. I chair the National Advisory Committee, and Austin chairs the Governmental Advisory Committee. Now, we are the two agencies or two committees that give advice to the U.S. Delegate to the CEC. And so our advisory committee consists of 15 members. The NAC committee has 50 members from academia, industry, nonprofit organizations. The GAC committee has 50 members from state, local, and tribal governments. We meet twice a year. The 2003 meetings were May 18th and December 7th of 2023. And this year's, our next upcoming meeting is December either the 5th or 6th, because that's still to be determined which day. Our federal representative for the committee is Oscar Carrillo, and he is the delegate. I mean, he is the official federal EPA representative to our committee. He organizes our meetings, he does the planning, and he hosts all of our meetings. We give advice letters. The last two that we presented to the EPA administrator was January the 20th of 2024, and the one prior to that was June the 23rd, 2023. Next slide, please. The committees advise the U.S. government, and that is the U.S. representative being the Honorable Michael S. Regan. He's the EPA administrator. And also Jane Nashida. Jane is the U.S. alternate representative to the CEC, and she's also a deputy administrator for the Office of International and Tribal Affairs. Jane Nashida hosts our two committees under her umbrella with the Office of International and Tribal Affairs. And the next slide. And we have the three who have oversight over those committees. I'm Vincent Nathan, the chair of the NAC, and Austin is the chair of the GAC. But Oscar Carrillo, again, is the designated federal officer, and he is a EPA employee working with Jane in the Office of International and Tribal Affairs. Now I'll introduce Austin Nunez, who's chair of the GAC, who will give you some background as to what our committee actually does. So Austin, take it from here.
All right, thank you, Dr. Nathan. Greetings, everyone. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this explains our mission. The committees were created in 1994 by Presidential Executive Order number 12915, which is the federal implementation of the North American Agreement on Environmental Cooperation, and have been continued until 2025 via executive order. The mission of the NAC and the GAC is to advise the U.S. government on trade and environmental issues. Next slide, please. The NAC-GAC advises the U.S. government on issues related to the CEC. We meet twice a year. We review the CEC's operational plan and budget and the draft strategic plan, and our recommendations are in the form of advice letters after each of our meetings. Next slide, please. In 2024, the NAC and GAC provided advice to the U.S. government on exemplary cities in North America with strong climate governance, nature-based solutions, environmental justice engagement, and promotion of Indigenous engagement and leadership. This advice was related to the Champion Cities initiative announced at the 2023 council session in Canada. Next slide, please. And so that concludes our presentation, and Dr. Nathan and I are available to take any questions.
I don't see anything in the chat box.
Yes, I don't.
We would like to thank them for their reports. Do you have any questions or comments? Can you please go ahead? Can you go to the microphone, please?
Buenas tardes, good afternoon. I guess just
Yo creo que brevemente, muchas gracias por su presentación.
how do these
¿Cómo estos dos comités asesores trabajan con los tipos de iniciativas que se nos presentaron por Amanda Hawk en la EPA en sí y la intención de involucrar comunidades y miembros del público con respecto a aplicación de la ley de reglamentos ambientales y trabajar hacia justicia ambiental?
Austin, can you take that one?
Austin, ¿puedes contestar esa? Sí, claro. Debido a este es mi segundo año de estar involucrado
The advice that we give
en el consejo que damos.
begins to work with
Empezamos a trabajar con los representantes locales y no importa cuáles sean los asuntos que
the environmental communities to address their concerns. And I apologize too that I didn't hear the previous presentation, but generally that's the way that that the process works. And I don't know if Dr. Nathan wants to add anything.
I didn't hear it either. To tell you the truth, I didn't hear the interpretation.
Well, I hope I did answer the question that was asked.
Any more questions? If not, thank you once again to Vincent and Austin for your report. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for inviting us.
Thank you very much as well.
Now, I would like to ask the technicians to give us the results of the last survey, please. Thank you very much. Now, we will have panel 2, community movement and issues on environmental justice, for which I pass the floor to my colleague of the committee, Cecia Esther Chuk-Uk, to moderate. Go ahead, Cecia.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
to the committee, to the JPAC. And next, we're going to start with a panel, community mobilization and challenges in terms of environmental justice. The territory is the most important part for exercising the collective rights of the peoples of the world, and it is a priority to keep it safe and sound for reproducing culture, preserving the unique ways of naming all beings that coexist in this space. Likewise, we keep the traditional ways of organizing, spirituality, millenary languages. Defending the territory is defending the life of all human beings and beings in general. In the territories, there is a development model that does not have a dialogue with the regulations of the First Nations and the holistic relationship with the environment. In this round table, we're going to show the principles of the environmental justice, and we will give some examples of the communities that are enforcing these principles. And we will also create a platform to analyze the current challenges in terms of environmental justice that the three different countries in North America face. We're going to exchange reflections in terms of future path for the subcontinental arena. The session will include presentations from 4 panelists, 3 in person, and a colleague. Because of the climate, she was stranded in the New York airport. And then we're going to have a discussion with a Q&A session from the audience about the 4 environmental justice principles, and we're going to show 4 community examples reflecting each principle. In this occasion, we would like to thank the acceptance of this council to have these panelists. First of all, I would like to introduce Naolo Charles. Naolo is the founder of Black Environmental Initiative and co-founder of the Canadian Coalition for Environmental Justice, which played a significant role in the campaign for the first act against environmental racism in Canada. Charles has a master's in environment, and he is a bilingual expert in communications and environmental education. During his postgraduate studies, he studied the way his government and companies can use the assessment data for life cycle to communicate the social and environmental consequences of daily products that are labeled environmental products. And this was part of the expert group of the advisory table called by the Environmental Climate Change Agency to create the first policy for adaptation in Canada, and also talking about environmental justice and anti-racism. And he has studied the Black race for all his life, and this can be seen in environmental justice. Naolo Charles, welcome. Next, we're going to have Josefa Sanchez Contreras. She is Soque from Chimalacua, Oaxaca. She is a researcher from the Granada University, Indigenous Soque from the Autonomous University, and a professor in Latin American Studies from the Autonomous University of Mexico that was hired as this sociology department. Josefa Sanchez Contreras is the current professor and visitor in the Center of Studies of Latin America in the Cambridge University in the United Kingdom. In her academia, Sanchez Contreras collaborates in different projects about energy transition. She is the author of Energetic Colonialism and Sacrifice Territories for Energy Transition in Spain, Mexico, Norway, and West Sahara, and thinking of the contemporary soques. And she's also part of the Matza collective made up of soques indigenous groups that defend the rivers, the rainforest in Charmalapa. Tris, how? She is the co-title of the Network of Environmental Justice in North Carolina from the Co-Direction of Education of the Network of Justice of North Carolina. Chris Howe has worked with communities that are affected by the environmental racism, and they put in contact with the students to help them uh, uh, develop advocacy strategies based on empiric and scientific data, and at the same time, this improves the environmental justice policies in the classrooms. How has delivered classes in the University of Maryland in Baltimore County where they created efforts for engagement, for practical outcomes in favor of the communities that have been negatively impacted by environmental justice. Don Hardy, Mayor of North Carolina, Kingston County, chairman of the county of the Association of He's a major of Kingston since 2017. Major, he's a major and he's veteran from the Army of the U.S. And he was also a police officer, and he was sworn in the sheriff's office, and he has worked at a local, federal, and federal level in law enforcement for 17 years. And also, Major Hardy is part of the Council of the North Carolina, of municipalities of North Carolina, and also the National League of Cities. He was also the chairman of the Major Association of North Carolina and the municipal officers, Afro-American officers elected, and chairman of the Pitt Greenville League. This is his second administration as appointed by the government for the Crime Commission of North Carolina, and he is member of the for the Police National Committee, and he is part of the different committees that represent the Kingston and other cities, peoples, and tribes, and police officers all around North Carolina. Welcome, all of you. Welcome to this panel. This is a very interesting panel where we're going to be talking about these topics, and after their presentations, we're going to have a Q&A session. So we're going to start with Naolo Chavez. Please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. So I think I was invited to talk about the Canadian context and the challenges and the realities of environmental racism that some communities are experiencing in Canada. And usually when we talk about these issues, we're always looking for examples. But when I talk about these issues, I like to have a very holistic perspective. And I want to borrow a frame from the concept of ecology. So the textbook definition of ecology is the study of organisms, their interactions, organisms including humans, their interactions with their physical environments and ecosystems. So the type of things I like to think about is the historical interactions of humans and the type of impacts we had on physical environments and the ecosystems that we've created as a result. When we talk about environmental issues of marginalized communities, we can't just talk about CO2. We can't limit our storytelling to CO2. We also have to talk about all the other pollutants, because when we only focus on CO2, we tell an incomplete story. And every time you tell an incomplete story, you leave space for misinformation to build in society. So racialized communities in Canada are greatly impacted by many other pollutants. We think about particulate matter, PM2.5, nitrogen dioxide, NO2, sulfur dioxide, SO2, all leading to respiratory and cardiovascular disease, lung cancer, premature death in communities that often live near highways and industrial areas. We think about lead, mercury in the water of communities surrounded by petrochemical industry, like the Chemical Valley near Sarnia in Ontario. We think about VOCs, pesticides, and other toxins that are affecting farm workers and rural communities around farms. And some of these toxins actually come back to all of us through the process of bioamplification in the food chain. We think about radon, the byproduct of the decay of uranium, second leading cause of lung cancer, that communities in Canada will face more over time as Canada started investing more in nuclear energy. And things like deep geological repositories to dig in the ground and put nuclear waste there. We also think about the dangerous chemicals in everyday products that some of our communities are willingly using, sometimes on our hair, skin, because we are colonized to think that we needed to look a certain way to be acceptable. We know about all these issues, but one of the links that we don't always make is the link to mental health issues. Recent research shows that exposure to toxins lead to issues like dementia, Alzheimer in communities, brain health issues, often leading to brain development issues in children, with the consequences on educational attainment. So I was invited to talk about the Canadian context, but I actually only arrived in Canada 25 years ago from Africa. And African people, one of the cultural traits that we have in common with Indigenous people is we like to pay homage to our ancestors. So on my mom's side, our ancestors come from a tribe that we call the Akan tribes. These are tribes that ran away from Ghana, and my family got established in a country called Côte d'Ivoire now. It is exactly the same Akan tribes who back in 1482 saw the Portuguese come in boats with prefabs to build what we call today the Elmina Castle. That is known as one of the first colonial buildings outside of Europe. The story that happened to the local community when we think that it's the same story that gets repeated over and over again, the political processes of environmental racism. It is a story of natural resource extraction. This case was gold. It is the story of the long term. The access to natural food, diet changes that lead to all types of disease. It's a story of unhealthy land practices that also lead to displacement and repression of anyone who resisted. That story gets repeated over again, to the point that today, most people normalize the fact that for many of us, the plants that grow in our community are not true. Factory smoke instead of oxygen. And the only animals in this ecosystem are rats, racialists, and capitalists who, powered by greed, have no issue exposing women and children to dangerous toxins and sending police to grandmothers that are protesting the pollution of their community. So last week, as you know, we had the chance to see the first environmental justice bill being passed in Canada. And I only started getting involved in this project about 4 years ago when I started working with Dr. Ingrid Walton as part of a coalition that we started together. Dr. Ingrid Walton works tirelessly on supporting the communities of Sherwood that were dealing with a toxic dump in their communities. Thanks to a book that she wrote, There's Something in the Water, and a documentary of the same name, she was able to raise awareness about their situations. And I think one of the most successful part of her work was that she was able to empower someone like Louise DeLille, a community member in Sherwood, who started our own organization to educate our own community on the realities of environmental racism. So I give this example because true power to change these situations is in the community. It's not in the powerful structures that we have. It's not in government, it's not in foundations, it's in the communities themselves. And our jobs as EJ advocates is to find a way to give resources to communities so that they can find the solutions to their own problems. Despite her great work, Ingrid had to wait 10 years to see that bill passed. And the reason why we had to wait all that long for that bill to pass is because this bill was actually about racism. And in our countries, we don't have consensus on the realities of racism. And in many cases, it makes us uncomfortable to talk about it. So I'm sorry if I make anyone comfortable talking about racism. But what makes me uncomfortable is the fact that our communities have been historically and continue to be devalued. And because we are devalued, the land where we live are also devalued. So the neighborhoods where we are visible majorities tend to always have no investment. And it's only when we leave the neighborhoods that the municipalities now feel the need to make investments to attract people of higher brackets to be able to get more tax money. Even the grocery stores run away from our neighborhoods, leaving our communities having to feed themselves out of dollar stores and fast food chains. The racist processes that are part of all these examples that I provide can also be seen in more violent projects that have to do with infrastructure projects that are displacing our communities. But one of the messages that I'm trying to share today is that these processes are not just harming the communities. Sometimes they actually eradicate them. And that leads to what I call the loss of cultural biodiversity. And that doesn't just happen in America, it happens in Canada as well. Actually, we have so many examples of well-known historical Black communities in Canada that have completely been wiped out by the same processes. Examples like Africville and Birchtown in Nova Scotia, Ogunzali in BC, Neil Burgundy in Quebec, Oro and Wilberforce, North Buxton in Ontario. There's at least 10 to 12 different Black settlements in Canada that have completely disappeared because of these processes, and there's probably even more. So history really matters a lot in terms of environmental justice. And if we don't tell that history, it makes it easy for the racialists to tell people that when we do environmental justice work, it's about creating a special treatment for people, or it's about playing the victim card. So I think we have to focus on telling that history. And I want to finish by saying, when I started the initiative, I started it for two reasons. One was a challenge, and the other one was an opportunity. The challenge is that I strongly believe one of the biggest obstacles to fighting and winning the fight against climate change and capitalism is racism. Because racism is the reason why we can't see humanity in all of us and why we can't think of all of us together as one humanity, working together to solve some of the biggest issues of the world. The second reason why I started this organization is the opportunity. If you look at what indigenous communities have already proven, is that they are the best at protecting the planet. So there's no reason for us to have a white-led environmental movement. But also think about what happened a few years ago after the murder of George Floyd. What happened at that time is proof that even when Black communities, we do not have economic and political power, we always find a way to have a cultural influence in society. So what does that mean? It means that when we understand that the work we have to do is about cultural change, we need to invest in the communities that can help us do that change. We have to invest in that vision. So in my opinion, one of the most dangerous things that capitalism did was destroying the land, the land pollution. But capitalism also created mental pollution. So I think we need to clean our mental before we can actually really clean the communities. Thank you.
We are sure that from this conversation will generate a lot of ideas that Naolo shared with us. Thank you very much for bringing these concepts to the table, concepts that generate that thinking, like the concept of environmental racism and that complaint of the extractivism that the indigenous communities have suffered. And also, it also makes us to generate those ideas in order to be able to contribute to this climate crisis, to lessen the effects that all of us are experiencing, not only human beings, but all the living beings. Ms. Contreras from Chimalapa, she is virtual, and she is going to share her experience, and we are sure that we will have many reflections and they will contribute elements for the three countries of North America. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Josefa, for accepting our invitation. Go ahead.
Huejesajian, Yomadekai, Pendekai, Awindekai. Desde Ampensame Cumcuijo Soque, Tecanje, Oaxaca, México. De Mimpa Tumnash Cumcuijo, Binash de Jejpaji, Nenti Tumcoyumi. Jemji en Anquimodampa y en Jemji en Istemtampa. Desde Mimpa Cumcuijo Onju en Cotoitampa. Paui Maeshuque en Istentampa. Moshan, Comoshan, Ipshan, Amintec.
Good afternoon
Todos los asistentes.
to all of you present.
Muchas gracias.
First, thank you very much for the Commission for Environmental Cooperation for your invitation to participate in this very necessary panel, this panel of community mobilization and environmental justice. Thank you to the panelists for sharing this. I'm going to
Con las
pass my slides,
lo puedo manejar.
if I can do it. Okay.
Voy a enfocar
I'm going to focus my participation on three aspects that I believe are basic, necessary, three challenges in environmental justice that are very present in the community mobilization that are very present in the indigenous territories. You can see it on the screen.
Continuación, la otra.
Now, I'm going to the next slide, please. The first challenge, the first of the biggest challenge is the one that corresponds to the demand of minerals in light of a very climate crisis, in light that in this 21st century we have exceeded the geophysical limits of the planet. We are in a challenging crisis for the possibility of life in this planet when we have exceeded 1.5 degrees of temperature on Earth. We have been demanding how much the states and the governments and the corporations start assuming measures that mitigate this profound crisis. And one of these measures that are being taken is what we call the energy transition within the green packs of the states, of the governments. We have a transition, energy transition, in which we identify one of the biggest events, and that is the way we are seeing this energy transition. It requires large extractions of minerals to such a point that the World Bank has estimated that in order to have this type of energy transition that implies decarbonization of the economy, the electrification of the countries, in order to pass to renewable sources, we would require in the next 3 years 3 3 trillion tons of minerals, and we have to abandon fossil fuels, which are the main contaminants, the main emissions of greenhouse gases. However, we have this limit that it is so much that the demand of minerals at an international level can be translated to countries like Mexico and the starvation of trans. This map is one of the maps developed by the Secretariat of Economy, which is the one that grants the concessions. So we have the copper, aluminum, lithium, and certain earths, certain dirt that we have. A community case that I have to mention is the Soki Chimalapa. The next, please. This is one of the this is one of the most biodiverse regions in Mexico, but also in Mesoamerica. In this area, we have two concessions for the extraction of gold and copper. This concession is in the hands of a Canadian company, and this concession has been granted by the Secretariat of Economy in Mexico without consulting the communities. The communities, the communities that live there have expressed a series of manifestations because of the risks that this mining extraction implies to our land: water contamination, river contamination, the making holes in our land, which is sacred. How can we translate that the rivers have life? How can we translate this to the legal framework? How can we mention that it has an important role in our reproduction of life? How can we solve this conflict? Please click on the video.
¿Podemos darle clic al video, por favor?
Can you please click on the video? One of the species that we have in the zone of the Chimalapas is this jaguar. But it's not only this jaguar, it's everything that lives in this territory. How can we put over the extraction of gold with the relationship of the communities with its territories.
La siguiente diapositiva.
The next slide, please.
Entonces,
So there is a question that I have
en este panel,
for this panel, and that is, how can we exercise environmental justice before the increase of extraction, which is demanding at a planet level a transition, a supposedly transition that requires our great minerals to build these infrastructures that require electrification and decarbonization of the economies.
otro de los
Another challenge that implies this first point of energy transition is that it is demanding large amounts of land for the generation of energy. One case is the case of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, where we have the Zapoteca communities, where they have a corridor of eolic farms, the largest in the country. We have 1,564 turbines, and this is having severe impact on the water tables and the birds, the migration of birds. And here I would like to mention that the Secretariat of the Environment is listening, that the environmental impact has to be regional dimension, not only a dimension that is fractional. We cannot assess the impacts on 3,000 hectares or 6,000 hectares that each eolic farm requires the permits for from Semarnat. And like in Chimalapa, that topic of mining, it has to be more clear, more transparent from the Secretariat of the Environment so that the community can express their environmental justice. We have requested from Semarnat the resolution that has been issued because this company has requested to mine gold, and there hasn't been any transparency. There's no in the resolution that was requested. Another great challenge that we have in our 21st century in with regards to Mexico are the sacred conflicts that are also linked to the concessions, to the mining concessions or other energy infrastructure. In Mexico, this is not less because great of these territories, sacred territories, are ejidos, and they are not in private property. It is estimated that according to the program that there are 500 sagrario conflicts that have an impact on 352 sagrario nucleus.
caso,
Another case that shows and where this idea is coming and is the case of Chimalapas, the community to which I belong. And
69
it is
con
160,000
comunidades.
hectares in Chiapas.
Eh,
And this is very important to the environment.
Diapositiva, por favor. Cuando vemos
When we see that there's a co-relationship with the fires that we are experiencing in these last months with our Sagrario conflict, it's more difficult to manage them, but also in some points there are fires that are man-made because these are territories in conflict. Some of the images that we have from Chimalapa to show you in this form.
podemos seguir a la otra diapositiva.
Can we go to the other one, please? These are other photographs. Go to the next, please. These are other photographs. As you can see, this is one of the jaguars. The jaguars have been running away from the territory. And here it is important to mention also that we need to strengthen the government institutions who are in charge of mitigating these forest fires. Forest fires that are not only in Chimalapa, but in like the Misateca Sierra in Oaxaca, Mexico. They were exceeded, and until we received the rains, they were controlled. This mentions that we need more infrastructure in order to mitigate these fires, which are going to be more constant as time goes by.
Las imágenes.
Another image. Next, please.
La siguiente diapositiva, por favor. Otro
Another aspect that are relevant is that in the frame of all these discussions, territorial conflicts, we are seeing in Mexico also the violence that is putting the country in Mexico in the third place according to the Global Business Bulletin, in the third place of the third place in Mexico, which is the most dangerous for environmental defenders. So we have to understand those indigenous farmers who fight on a daily basis so that these territories can continue being protected. So in order not to have immoderate logging so that mining cannot contaminate the rivers. And
podemos pasar
can we go to the next one, please?
tipos de acción.
What type of actions can we generate? Well, take the proposals from the communities, from the conservation linked to their community statutes. We cannot generate policies from the top down that are for local communities. We have to adjust to the frames, to the local frames, to the community statutes, to the land ownership.
Otro de los
Another,
siguiente, por favor. Y para ir
and in order to start concluding, I would like to say that these cases that I have shown and these 3 points show us that the exercise of environmental justice in indigenous communities, indigenous territories, in farming communities in Mexico are very important when we can prove that 70 to 80% of the biodiversity richness in the country are in these territories, which are social property. So therefore, the solution of the conflicts, the agriculture conflicts, it's not only an agriculture dimension. It's not only the dimension of parcels. It's also a dimension of presenting these territories which are rich in biodiversity that for the communities can be interpreted as a very deep relationship that we have with the rivers, with living beings. Can we go to the next one, please?
podemos señalar
We can mention
justicia ambiental
that environmental justice, the way we have been mentioning, recognizes that the settler, the colonialism, the historic colonialism influences in the distribution and inequity of how contamination is distributed. And it is also necessary to mention that the climate catastrophes, environmental catastrophes that we're experiencing in the 21st century have their origin in the historical colonization, which has inequalities, racial inequalities, like we heard in the previous presentation, this economic, racial inequalities and this continuity of colonialism is carried out as a crisis. The climate crisis becomes more acute. We cannot have energy transitions or eco-social transitions that are formed in the colonial dynamics that have taken the whole planet to catastrophe, because if what we're doing is producing the same thing without having solutions. So the last one, please.
sentido.
In that sense, to talk about climate justice in countries such as Mexico is talking about generating legal mechanisms to solve this agricultural conflicts and to hear the communities that have the right to autonomy to the territory when they demand that you cancel mining concessions, and to talk about justice before these crimes for environmentalists, those people who have disappeared. That is environmental justice. To recognize the rights to self-government and to recognize the agricultural rights and to start talking about the rights of nature, of the rivers, of the hills, of the lakes as a part of our daily life and the possibility of habitat. Thank you very much.
No doubt that Josefa Sanchez Contreras, soccer from the Chimalapas region in Mexico, has taken us to a reflection place where the territory, the land, has critical part in for the human beings. It, that characteristic of human beings is shared by pollinators, by all living creatures that coexist in these territories. So this is a very clear presentation on what they are experiencing in this biodiverse region. And this is calling for the government and other organizations to look for the voices from the field, the voices from the owners of the land, as well as guardians of the territories. Well, next, we're going to listen to the different ways in which environmental education is promoted through Chris Howe. Go ahead, please, Chris.
Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Thank you for inviting me here. My name is Chris Hahn. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs, and I'm very happy to be here. I live in Durham, North Carolina, and I'm happy to represent the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network today. I'm not the only one. I'd like to give a shout out to my team over there, Dr. Valerie Johnson and Dr. Danny Lynn Hunter, and also my baby, who you've surprisingly seen but not heard. Fingers crossed, Waya. And part of what we do as a network, we're a small staff but a big family. We've been in existence for 26 years, and we can always remember the date because Dr. Valerie Ann Johnson, who's one of the founding members of our organization 26 years ago, gave birth today, and this is her daughter's birthday, and also the same year that the network was born. So we can always remember, yes. So birthing the movement in another way, keeping that intergenerational piece alive. I also want to give a shout out because what we do as a network is we bring people together. And I'm really excited to talk about education because anyone can be an educator. You just have to be able to tell your story. And anyone can be a student. You just have to be willing to listen and learn. And so I'm happy that we were able to also bring with us Yesenia Puello over at NC Field. Reverend William Kearney, who you hopefully, if you ate your lunch quick enough, got to hear from a bit and see his documentary, We Birthed the Movement, out from Warren County. And also Leticia Zavala. Oh, hey, there you are. Over at the El Futuro es Nuestro. So really, we want to bring people there. These are really good examples of folks that are both excellent educators and brilliant students, because they are constantly changing their methods, learning things new, and telling their stories to build a stronger movement. And that's really what we're about, trying to build our environmental justice movement here in North Carolina. Next slide, please. And my job as the co-director for research and education is to really think about how we can make sure that our research supports our organizing and policy. We're thinking about how the work that we do supports the advocacy, make sure that our research is actionable. People can do something with it. And as a part of education is to also be able to tell that story and surprise people. So I'm going to let you know and give you a heads up. You're about to be surprised by how we do some of these things. Next slide, please. It's with spiders. One of the ways in which we are able to bring people together to tell stories and to highlight the injustices that they face is through monitoring air quality. There's lots of ways to monitor air quality in the world. However, particularly in places that don't have reliable Wi-Fi or external power, a lot of the ways that we can monitor air quality don't actually apply in rural North Carolina. I developed a project called Spidey Sensor, where people can monitor air quality by collecting spider webs. And the wonderful thing about spiders is that they are everywhere. You knew that. And their webs can collect dust. And we collect those webs and measure the contaminants on them and can tell the story that sometimes our very expensive government reference monitors cannot tell because they're telling stories of regional air quality and actually choose to be further away from a particular source of contamination so it's not skewed, right? And so we're able to go straight to where a source of contamination is, where our communities are, and also where spiders are. Next slide, please. So we train people on how to identify the spider webs, funnel weavers in this case. And we also have people go through and collect those webs. And so we work with communities on finding and locating and then collecting those webs. It is a scavenger hunt. And that is another part of education that I think is important to remember. Who has had fun learning something new? Anybody? Yes, learning something new is exciting. The joy of discovery is something that fuels our movement. And we need joy when we have so much heartbreak, when we have so much devastation to keep things going because these fights are not short. They are very long. Reverend Kearney was just talking 40 years ago was the birth of the movement. They are still fighting for things, right? These are long fights. These are long things. We can go on to the next slide, please. And so what we do is we teach people to find the webs and also collect them. And again, for people that have been often lied to about the problems that they face, that their illness is not because of a floating facility. It's because of their lifestyle. They're lied to that there's nothing that the government can do to fix it. They're lied to for so many reasons. To be able to have a day outside and reconnect with the land and be able to experience just a different side and a different world of something that they walk through every day. It can be a really joyous experience. Next slide. It also can be an intergenerational experience. A lot of the folks that we work with are elders, but Spidey Sensor can bring out all ages. And so our elders can say, well, my grandson loves Spider-Man, and bring out the grandkids to come as well. And I'm very proud to say that my child, Waya, who's pictured here on the left, found our first web at our first event. So perfect. And I'm very good at collecting and finding spider webs. That's what I've been doing for 15 years. But Waya was the perfect height and in the perfect spot to be able to find a web that was 6 inches off the ground. I couldn't see it, but they had the perfect perspective. And I think that's another thing that can create joy and motivation to do the work that we do. That it can be surprising if we can contribute in everybody's case. And so sometimes people that are most afraid of spiders are the ones that best at spotting them. And so even though they're really hesitant to join, they're like, okay, but they also get the joy of being able to discover a web and stay at a distance, have some needles collected. That happened with an elder who was on a cane, and there were other youth that also, going through and looking for webs, and they found the kids looked through an area and kept going over very fast, and she was feeling discouraged because she was on a cane, she could not keep up, and she was not going to be able to explore the whole area. But she went back to the place where the kids searched. She found 3 webs that they had missed. And so sometimes it can be fun just to surprise ourselves, and that can be a joy of education as well. And so we really want to harness, again, that joy, because it's not just the information that's important for education. It's the connection, because it's not the number that's going to make a difference to be able to advocate and make change. It's people being passionate about what it means, but people being able to take it to their city legislator, to their county city council, or their state legislator, or their governing body. It's people being able to stand together and march, protest, or go to a very boring meeting, and still stand by that message, that story, and tell it time and time again. Next slide. And so what we want to do is be able to take projects, Spidey Sensor and projects like it, and really harness the power and infrastructure of education. So I'll give you an example. Our public schools are categorized by economic well-being, and we have 100 counties in North Carolina, all listed here. And they are broken up into tiers. So tier 1 are the 40 most distressed counties in the state. Tier 2, those are the next 40 distressed counties. And tier 3 are the least distressed counties in the state. And so those areas in the dark blue, dark gray are the places that have the most distressed, or the least income here in the state of North Carolina. And next slide. You can see that there's clusters. There's a spatial distribution of these areas. It's not just by happenstance. It's not just scattered every other county. Most of them are in Eastern North Carolina. And if you can actually see where we are, we're in the tier 3 area down at the bottom right of the screen in Wilmington, because we're in a beautiful tourist beach town, right? There's a lot of wealth here, but surrounding this area, there's not. And so focusing on these categorizations help the state funnel money and programs to these areas. So these are the places where the state has committed to improving the education in these counties, in these tier 1 counties in particular. Next slide, please. And this is a map coming from from the White House based on their climate and economic screening tool. And this is, again, the state of North Carolina, and the environmental justice communities are the ones that are in the darker color. You can go to the next slide. I just want to show you a little bit of overlap here, that if we focus our education in our tier 1 schools, we're not just hitting just the schools themselves. We are able to educate places where there are actual environmental justice issues there. So think about our elders coming into schools and telling stories, not just about this concept of environmental justice, but what's happening in their hometown, what's happening in their area. And that, again, is an ability not just to share curriculum and check boxes, but to tell stories, build connections, and build an entire movement. And next slide. And for Spidey Sensor, we're just getting started, and we've gotten through 2 counties. And hopefully by the end of the year, we'll add a couple more circles on this list. But we really hope to be able to expand not just what we're doing on our own, but really to have a network of teachers, educators, other folks that are able to do this in their classrooms and really build on that educational infrastructure. And last one. It's all we need this thought that communities thrive with strong networks, but we also don't have to reinvent it. We're constantly building networks. We are social people. They already exist. Sometimes it means telling the same stories in a surprising way to be able to find a new network and a new group that we haven't thought of before. Places.
We would like to thank these examples of environmental education where different members of the family are engaged, and also providing the children the ability to fall in love with the different resources and the way all the members of the family participate. Thank you very much, Chris, for this great presentation. And finally, we're going to guarantee an equitable engagement on the decision-making process for everyone. I would like to invite Don Hardy, Mayor of Kingston, North Carolina, to address some words. Thank you so much.
First, let me say good afternoon to everyone in the room today. Indeed, an honor and distinguished pleasure to be here amongst each and every one of you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here today to advocate for one of the most important things in America, and that's environmental justice. You know, if it wasn't important, I don't think you guys would be in the room today. But let me just say this. I'm not going to take too much of your time, and I'm going to move swiftly through what I have to say today. As it relates to community mobilization and environmental justice, they are deeply interconnected as grassroots efforts that often drive initiatives for change, particularly in marginalized communities. Here's an overview of their relationship and the challenges they face. Community mobilization involves organizing and engaging local residents to collectively address issues impacting their lives. It empowers community to advocate for their rights and bring about social change. In the context of environmental justice, community mobilization can lead to significant and local environmental conditions, public health, and overall quality of life. As we talk about strategies, building alliances, policy advocacy, direct action, informing community members about environmental issues and their rights is a must. Forming coalitions with other communities, NGOs, and advocacy groups is something that we have to do. Lobbying for legislative changes and holding government and corporations accountable is something that we must do. And at some point, we must have some type of direct action as it relates to protests, peaceful protests, by the way. Community cleanups and other grassroots activities to address immediate concerns. Environmental justice ensures that no group of people, particularly marginalized low-income communities, that bears a disproportionate share of environmental hazards. Many of those Tier 1 communities, high distress census tract areas all across our state and all across America. So the challenges that we have will be the disproportionate impact, the lack of resources, political marginalization, economic pressures, regulatory gaps, climate change, community-driven solutions. Under disproportionate impact, marginalized communities often live closer to polluting industries, landfills, and other environmental hazards, leading to higher exposure to pollutants and associated health risks. These communities typically have fewer resources to combat environmental injustice, such as limited access to legal support, funding, and technical expertise. There is often a lack of political representation, making it harder for these communities to influence policy decisions that affect their environment. Economic constraints can force communities to accept environmentally harmful industries for job creation and economic development, despite the long-term health and environmental costs. Inadequate regulations or weak enforcement of existing laws can exacerbate environmental injustices, leaving vulnerable communities unprotected. Climate change disproportionately affects marginalized communities, exacerbating existing vulnerabilities through extreme weather events, rising sea levels, and other environmental stressors. We must have community-driven solutions, empowering local leaders and activists to spearhead initiatives, utilizing environmental laws and regulations to hold polluters accountable. And as it relates to sustainable development, we must continue to promote green jobs and sustainable economic practices that do not compromise environmental health. Health initiatives, providing healthcare and monitoring for environmental health impacts, partnering with academic institutions, NGOs, and government agencies to leverage resources and expertise. Crafting policies that specifically address the needs and challenges of marginalized communities, including voices in decision-making process, and looking at how more funding can be allocated for addressing environmental justice. We must continue to organize, educate, and advocate for communities and confront and mitigate the disproportionate environmental burdens they face, working towards a more just and sustainable future. So there are many things that we can do to help with environmental justice. But the most important thing we must do is come together as a region, regionally, to be able to have the most powerful impact in your particular region. So you must reach out to your legislators, your local government representation, to voice your concern. Now, I understand that there are many silos or cities and towns across our state in particular that try to operate alone. We can't operate alone. We must operate in groups, in regions. This is how we get the most done across our state. So having said that, I leave you with this quote. We must do whatever we can, however we can, whenever we can, to help impact the lives of others for the better. That's my shot.
Thank you very much to all the participants in this very interesting panel regarding community mobilization and challenges in the matter of environmental justice. I think that all the presenters in this panel have discussed the work, the examples, the work that they carry out in the three regions of North America. And we have many ideas, many challenges that Don Hardy just mentioned, the margination The everything that we are experiencing, climate crisis, a lot of pressure, and the impact, the disproportionate impact of all the projects in these regions, these projects of extraction. So many solutions are based in the community to listen to the voices of the indigenous communities, and the CEC has incorporated from previous years the traditional ecological knowledge from the three countries, and we consider that they have a lot to contribute for that holistic vision that we have of the territory and of all living beings, not only human beings, but the life of all the elements of nature, the way we get close to our natural resources, to water, land, plants, crops, trees, and also the ways that we call them, that has a lot of importance to retake them and bring them to this conversation, that it would be a lot in this dialogue to look for solutions, very precise solutions and urgent solutions for this climate crisis in which all of us are experiencing. Now we have space for questions and answers from the public, and we can share from the social media, the internet, where they are following us, and they can also participate. And we will incorporate all these questions for the future strategies, immediate future strategies that the Council has. Okay, we can start with some guides, which are the challenges with regards to environmental justice that the communities are facing currently in Mexico, United States, and Canada. Best practices, what are the best practices that we can share to mobilize and understand the communities in the efforts of environmental justice in North America? You have the microphone. We don't have too much time, but I'm sure that we will have a small break in order to talk to our panelists. And then we would also go to the question that we are going to ask in the survey. But first, we go to the questions. And we have a microphone on the right, and we also have a microphone on the left if you want to comment or participate. Thank you. Thank you. Amelia Reina, member of the Czech EG group. Thank you for excellent presentations. And I congratulate myself of listening and having all this feedback. My question is, what method or what form can be applied to insert indigenous knowledge in the legislations of your countries? Thank you. Excellent questions. If there is any other panelists who would like to answer. Dr. Josefa also wants to say something. Thank you very much for the question. First, I would like to mention that the laws that already exist first have to be complied with. The rights in the matter of agriculture, in environmental and indigenous have to be met. And I think that they are not being shared. And how do we include the indigenous knowledge? But that is to expand the nature. There are proposals of nature rights, the rights of the rivers as subjects, as subjects of rights. So that can be an area to introduce these notions of the communities in their relationship with these, not only with these elements, not only with these territorial elements, but with these practices, because the fact that the majority of the territories of biodiversity and richness are in indigenous communities is not an essential fact. It's not a matter that we can mention in a lax form. It's a historical matter. It's cultural. It's practical, of long duration. And these practices that are at risk, like the issues of water, the management of crops, the management of areas that are highly biodiverse, are because of cultural practices. First, it is necessary to acknowledge, to respect the rights of the communities. This is a right to self-government, and on the other hand, to start also respecting the rights of nature, like it has been done in other countries, in other places, even though there are limiting factors. Very well.
Gracias. Thank you very much, everyone, for your presentations. They were great. And this is kind of our job as the Secretariat to do, but we need your help, and I would like to take the advantage to ask. We've been listening this morning and throughout the day of the importance of EJ advancing EJ agendas from a regional, from a very local perspective, with local communities, recognizing local solutions drafted from the local residents, right? So based on your experience working with so many communities, what would it be the recommendation that you would give us to start thinking about like a North American, about a regional agenda, where, as we've been seeing throughout the day, there are very different ways and contexts and interests and tools in the different countries?
Oh, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to try and answer this question and also find a way to answer the previous question a little bit. So I think one of the first things that we have to do is to, of course, engage indigenous communities and local communities in the laws that are developed. And in Canada, that's what we're planning on to with the new law of the custody law. It is in the law that government has to consult with communities. But if you remember, Marcus, the main message was for us to really adopt a holistic way that we understand the harms that we can bring to this, right? And so if you really think about, if you're looking for a way or a strategy to apply all of the different problems, first of all, even from a legal standpoint, all of these issues started from one specific law that we can think back to, which is the doctrine of Stalin, right? That was created a long time ago. That said that somehow Europeans could just come and take the land of people. So if you go from that center and you're looking for a solution, that means that the efforts you need to push are efforts to be able to help communities take back their land, right? And there's actual solutions for that. People are already implementing things like land models, land back models, things that you can do in Canada, in America, in Mexico, models that you can use to protect local land from the use of industry. I think that should be a priority all around the three countries. We need to remember that although these three countries are gathered in this organization, Canada alone and the city where I come from represent 60% of all global mining companies. So how do we work together to protect the communities from us, right? We have to empower them with the first step of power, which is land. Access to the land, protection of their land, so that they can do what they want on their land. I think that's something that can be done in all three countries. And then after that, giving them resources so that they can manage their environmental programs themselves. When you talk about data, that they develop their own data systems. So it's really about giving back the power to the communities. And I think we can do that in all three countries. Thank you.
I'll build off of that because it is important to think about all of these stories that we've heard aren't necessarily about pollution, but they're about power. And so when we think about what we need to fight, we need to actually be able to fight power. And that's where we're going to have actual impact. We have environmental justice here in the United States. We have it for white, wealthy people. We have the solutions to be able to have the things that we need and live in safe communities for the most part. Because we have a difference in power, because we still abide by racism, because we still have that acceptance of an unnatural balance of power, we are allowing this to continue, and it's killing all of us. And so when we are bold enough to attack that source and willing to let go of power and redistribute power, that is when we can make real change. And to do that across 3 nations, and not just 3, hundreds of nations across Turtle Island, we can have real environmental justice.
Hello.
Nos queda un tiempo muy breve. Josefa, perdón.
Okay.
Adelante.
Sí, disculpa, solo para hacer un apunte sobre la pregunta anterior, creo que generar alianzas regionales o planes regionales entre México, Estados Unidos y Canadá en materia de justicia ambiental tiene que pasar por el hecho de que los planteamientos de transiciones energéticas o transiciones ecosociales o los pactos verdes o las políticas ambientales en cada país tienen que estar realmente desde lógicas de alcanzar la justicia. Y creo que es un gran reto porque estamos también ante relaciones asimétricas entre los 3 países. Si revisamos ¿Cuál es el país que más energía consume? Entonces es el país que más minerales va a requerir y que más recursos va a requerir del otro. Entonces, ¿cómo superamos estas relaciones asimétricas, estas diferencias tan desiguales, digamos, ¿no? Entonces, una alianza, una estrategia trinacional, triestatal, pasa por también plantearse el acceso a la energía de los tres países, de la energía que ya está produciendo, de los recursos que hay, pero también con la reducción de los consumos de los que más, de los países que más consumen. Si no nos planteamos esto, entonces va a seguir siendo completamente desproporcional. Y ya, esta es mi participación.
Ya nos queda muy poco tiempo, ya estamos muy rebasados. Que sean breves las últimas dos participaciones que haya de esta parte.
Hi, thank you. My name is Janelle Booker. I am a representative from the United States Biosphere Network. I'm a youth chair, so youth as defined as 18 to 35 by UN, though most of the time we think about young people, we think about 4 and up, right? But I really appreciated everyone's panels today, and there's a lot of discussion about intergenerational work and even intergenerational justice as part of the work for environmental justice. And I wanted to ask a question to each of you about the strategies around youth, around young people to implement environmental justice in your communities, particularly in rural communities where young people are fleeing to the urban centers. So how are you tackling those issues? How are you galvanizing and inspiring young people to stay in their communities and tackle those problems?
All right. So, well, first off is, getting our youth motivated to want to be in our communities is the first thing. Is how do we get them motivated to come back and give back to the community? Well, what you do first is create a space, a safe space to let them know that, okay, this is an area where you can operate in. We want to create some type of border commission. It's something I'm looking at, try to figure out how to get them to take leadership. When they feel that they're in leadership or able to have a voice and it actually means something, then they tend to come back and want to be able to pour into. And as working with you, we have some youth that they're very vocal on their responses as it relates to environmental justice. We just have to make sure that we are delivering a message the right way, and we'll be able to pour back into the community and build trust around, our youth, considering their thoughts and their recommendations as it relates to, EJ and any other particular opportunity that you may want to input on in your city or town. But I just think that you have to do something to help motivate them to come back, give them a real reason to come back. That they may have a job that would, be that's paying you working, a working wage. So I think that's one of the things, and being able to take a look at, how do we have you work from home or going to your office and giving them options. And I think options is more so what our youth need more so than anything, because that Gen Z type of approach is like, oh, I want to work from my phone or my computer at home. So giving them some options as to what it would look like to come back to your community to have an impact. And hopefully that would draw, and I'm seeing that it is drawing even more people back to your communities.
I think too that sometimes growing up in a place that has been, I'll say, devalued over time. It's dirty. You don't want to be there. There's nothing there. you see grass is greener on the other side. There are opportunities, there's money, there's a way for you to have a life outside of that. So people go. Part of that is telling another narrative and having our elders share what it used to be. Here in North Carolina and across the South, we have the legacy of land that has been in families since enslaved ancestors first got it, you know, in the 1800s. And some people still have that land, but it's being broken, it's being polluted on. And so not that the land is bad, but people have done something bad to it, and we can fight for it. We can fight to restore what it was. We can fight to restore it to a former glory. We can create opportunities, not just for ourselves, but for our future generations too. And so just to say that the fight's not over and there's something here that's worth fighting for, rather than maybe just like the current perspective, if they have it, of just like, there's nothing here and the internet's bad and I don't get, you know, cell phone service. But to be able to fight to make something better, but that also means that people have to see hope and people have to be able to have those opportunities, like Don was saying, to be able to work in that space and fight, have those opportunities there. So that's what we try to do as an organization is when we meet folks like that are passionate about their hometowns and want to go back, we try to find the resources so that they can go back, because those are the best fighters. Those are the best places because they have a stake in that land. They have a stake in that area. That is their story. And again, when people are telling their stories, they're going to be the best educators. So that's really what we want to be able to fuel each time, is to really have people go back and keep fighting for it, because these are decades long intergenerational fights. We need to keep that going, but we also need to recognize that we need to help supplement, because there may not be something there, a lot there now.
So I often get contacted by people who have like youth programs and things like that for the Black Environmental Initiative. And I always have to push back to tell them, look, I'm in my 40s and this is not a youth-led organization. And the reason why people contact us is because all the people I work with are youth. I would never be able to do this work without young people. They are the energy in all of the programs we do. All of the staff we've had are always young people. They are the ones coming with the ideas, and most of our programs are focused on the engagement of young people. So, for instance, we created the first Black Canadian delegation to COP26. That was just young people. We didn't even know it was going to be the first one, but the people who were engaged were the young people. When we go into communities and we try to engage families, we start with children. We create games, things like that, and the children are the ones bringing the families to the workshops and to the stands that we have. So at the end of, in the middle of this summer, we're going to be sending a group of 5, 6 young Black folks who would be going to the Arctics, because we built a partnership with an organization called Adventure Canada to expose them to the realities of climate changes. Again, young people. So I don't see how we can do this work without focusing on young people. The last thing I wanted to say is that because I work a lot with young people, there's one message that I think is important that we share, because someone talked about climate anxiety this morning. And to me, it's very important that when we work with young people, we explain to them that what you need to do is to focus on what you have to do in your own life. We need to stop thinking that the world is going to end. Our job is to do our part, and then to make sure that the next generation does their part. The notion that it's all done and we have no hope is something that when I work with young people, I make sure that they don't think this way, because we have our own part to do, and the next generation is going to do their part. It's always been this way. So it's not a good mentality to think that the world is about to end. There's many communities for which the world ended a long time ago. So I think when we work with young people, we have to address that climate anxiety, and by giving them an opportunity to act, they don't feel climate anxiety.
And I just want to add one other thing as well. I think that every city, town across this particular state and across the country should have youth council, right? So youth councils play a major role in decision making for many different things. They are exposed to a lot of things that they wouldn't ordinarily be exposed to. Say, like if you want to take the council to a conference that talks about, federal advocacy. How do you, help put bills in place, advocate for what youth need most, or what they would like to see take place in their city or their state. So I think that, we must focus on how to get them involved. And I believe, and I really feel that would draw some of them back to their particular communities. Like when you pull in these youth councils, you should be strategic when you pull it from high schools, even middle school type, and try to instill some things in them that they never seen before, or never in places they never visited before, and how they have a voice to make a difference.
Bien.
Now, talking about the youth, I would like, as moderator of this workshop, and coming from the Mayan community in the Yucatan Peninsula, we have been working for 2 years integrating indigenous youth in 2 main topics. In the topic of production and consumption of local products. As we have mentioned before, we have been displaced from our own resources, our traditional fruits and vegetables, the friendly ways of producing food. And we have a civil organization called Chilivitos, Asociación Civil of Becal Campeche, where the youth that who graduates from the agricultural background have to talk to the youth that is in agronomy engineering. They are not knowledgeable of the local resources, the flora, the fauna, the knowledge, the organic organic earth, and incorporate that millennial knowledge that plus the knowledge that they get from the universities and colleges. We have inspired the youth to spread this beautiful heritage and make them interested in local resources. Local resources not only include the biological aspects, but also cultural aspects. We need to talk to some fruits, to eat them, to have some offers, provide some offers to the Mother Earth. This merge has been very appealing for the youth to engage and participate. Around a month ago, we started a radio program called Custabil Vida, and we address the life of human beings, of earth, of pollinators, of native trees, and our Mother Earth. I do consider that many would think, why are you using the radio? Because the radio is one of the resources and means of communications that have survived to the technology avalanche. And we are having a positive impact on the indigenous communities in Yucatan and Campeche. And just recently, we started this program that is going live in Facebook as well. And we see that the engagement of the youth it has been great, and they incorporate this knowledge to the knowledge they gained during their university years. The transfer of knowledge to children is extremely important. We talk about the importance of pollinators. As you know, the Yucatan Peninsula is a very wealthy region in Mexico and in the three countries as well. But the Yucatan Peninsula produces one of the resources that is exported to the European world, and that is honey. So this has to do, we do beekeeping of African bees and bees without with a sting, and that support the microeconomies to survive. That is agriculture, the creation of handicrafts, pottery, weaving, fiber weaving, natural dyes, and hammocks, and there's a wide range of possibilities. However, the importance of pollinators is because of the problems we are facing due to monocropping. Monocrops that are not the tradition of this region, such as rice crops, and they are extracting thousands of cubic meters of water for irrigation purposes, and also harming the Campechan rainforest. So the work with the youth is extremely important, and we are working on the use and production of local products and inspiring the children about the significance of pollinators. Not only are we talking about bees, but also other elements such as other animals, and this is extremely important because the children should be able to observe the insects, look at the different characteristics, and that should be appealing for preserving these insects and animals, and also preserves the native flora. Yucatan during January, February, March, and April, where we have to have a rainy season, a small rainy season for keeping the endemic population is extremely important. That's why this climate crisis affecting all the world, because of the fragility that we have in the balance with our environment, so we can continue with our culture, local economies, and resources. It is very difficult to keep that balance. That is why we are currently working on these two main topics that have to do with the production and use of local products, and the children should be working with pollinators. And together with this, we are working on the endemic flora that produces, that helps produce honey, and produces one of the most exquisite honeys in the world. And this honey coming from stingless bees, and they have medicinal characteristics. I wanted to take advantage of this space to share the experience for many years, but basically these last years we have included the children and the youth in our own local resources. I have two very rapid comments, but deep comments. In the case of Mexico, we already have a structure through which, a legal structure, I mean, through which the First Nations can institutionalize their demands. The Mexican Constitution says or acknowledges the original, the First Nations, and this happened 20 or 30 years ago. But the specifics on how this is enforced to the states. The states are the ones that are going to regulate how these demands can be institutionalized through a state law. But with the First Nations I have talked to, they say that they don't want any written laws, that they have laws that are not written. And in Mexico, the word has no value. Any demand, any report, any action or actions have to be documented or written in Mexico. And in order to have a more practical element, the First Nations must define which is their territory. If they don't have a territory and if they don't have a map, they don't have the product or the tool with which you will be able to demand your rights.
Where the territory starts is very important in the legal structure of Mexico. Any farmer who doesn't have his map in the National Agricultural Register will have problems all his life to do something in that land. If he's a ejidatario or a First Nation, they can promote it, but it's going to be very difficult. Now, for the issue that's in Mexico, but for people from Temec, I don't have time. The environmental problem in the world is guided by the market. If we allow the market to be above justice, we will not solve environmental problems. Why? Because the market, it is not true, like Alan Smith said, is the invisible hand that is going to distribute natural resources in the world. That's not true. And the three countries of the TMEC or CUSMA are guided by the market. They're not guided by justice. It's the market which establishes all the regulations and all the panels to solve problems on the CUSMA. An example, Mexico is not willing to import maize, transgenic white maize. They don't want to. And they are saying to the panel that this is a cultural issue because the maize originated there, that it is a health issue because it's going to hurt the Mexicans. And the United States says that they have the obligation because this is a product that is bought and sold, but there are limiting factors. There are communities that have certain qualities that do not go. They're not in the market. The ones who do not have money or buying power are not acknowledged by the market. You have to have a product to sell or you have to have resources to buy. If not, the market, that is why we have problems of land ownership, of ejidos, because they don't have money to buy the products. So the market is not going to solve anything. Another example is carbon the carbon credits. It was a good idea, the carbon credits, and the market began to control them. In Chicago, they are sold and they buy those carbon credits. When the real estate crisis in the United States exploded, those market credits, the credit market fell. The price of the carbon credits went down, and those companies that were generating, companies that, to say something, trying or treating water, I'm sorry, treating wastewater to produce methane, and they would sell the credits because they would burn the methane and they were not generating CO2. So nobody wanted to buy carbon credits, and that good practice disappeared because the market didn't exist anymore for that product. And then that's the way we go with everything. With water, Mexico is exporting water to the United States. When they send watermelons and melons to the United States, grapes, they are exporting water that they're taking away from the ejidatarios. That's the way the market is. Thank you very much. We would like to thank all the panelists who have done an excellent presentation. Dr. Josefa, thank you very much, virtual. And thank you for your ideas and for your conversation, Mr. Charles. Howe and Don Harding, thank you very much for all your contributions and for all your recommendations and experiences will be taken into consideration for the Council. Now, we are about to conclude with this panel, and we will open the mic for questions and answers. We invite you to answer the survey that was on the screen. And the question is, what is the aspect of community mobilization is more important to to advance the environmental justice in North America? A, B, reinforce the basis. C, to promote the collaboration between communities. And then D, strengthen the representation, local representations. These are the questions for the survey. And later on, we will give you the results of this survey with the public. Thank you very much. And Dr. Esteban. Thank you very much, Cecia. We conclude the second panel with the topic of community mobilization in the matter of environmental justice. Thank you, Cecia. And thank you to Naolo, Josefa, Chris, and Don Hardy. Thank you very much. A 10-minute break in order to continue with open dialogue. We'll see you in a few minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon. We're going to continue after this brief break caused by this emergency. Fortunately enough, it wasn't a major event. Thank you so much for everyone for being here. This segment is extremely important for all of us because it will provide to you yet an additional opportunity to share other examples of collaboration and successful partnerships and address other topics that you would like to share with all of us. I would like to start by asking the following question. Can we think of environmental justice from a regional perspective in North America? And this time, I would like to ask Felicia Marcus, my colleague Felicia Marcus, to help us facilitate the following discussion. Please, Felicia, go ahead.
Great. Muchas gracias. Thank you, Esteban, for that. Well, that was exciting, wasn't it? I hope you had a chance to have good conversations. Seemed like good energy out there, and I'm counting on you all to have figured it all out for us and give us the fruits of that discussion, or at least hopefully you made some new friends and contacts that you'll follow up with. Listening today has been great, and without spending too much time on memory lane, I just wanted to start up by saying how wonderful it is to be able to facilitate this session at this point in my life. I was one of the early public interest lawyers in the environmental justice world back in the 80s, representing concerned citizens of South Central and the mothers of East LA in their historic battle against two different incinerators, battles which we won, which was great. So you had in LA, you had the beginnings of some stories of some victories that then led to a collection or a collective from both in LA, the West Side and the East Side, an alliance between the environmental community in LA and the environmental justice community to come up with environmental justice principles that were signed on the steps of City Hall to create alliances where we showed up at their events, they showed up at our events, and we advocated collectively for our issues. And fortunately, I was able to take those lessons and that thinking into my government jobs, both in the local level at EPA and at the State Water Board in California, to try and practice what we were preaching, to come up with principles of siting equity, to make sure that when we were siting facilities, we weren't putting them in the same communities that had to deal with the brunt of facilities for the rest of the city for all that time, working with communities on drinking water in the Central Valley to get them access to clean, safe, and affordable water, et cetera. And the lessons that I learned in the 80s from some of those giants in the movement and from my clients who were also giants in the movement have really colored my view and my experience of why it makes sense to be engaged in government and why it makes sense to be engaged in committees like this one. And it's at this point, 30 years later, it is wonderful to see the three countries actually making this a priority, making it the topic of an entire meeting, and actually considering what the three North American countries can do together to accelerate their work collectively and individually. So I thank you for staying here with us, for coming back after the excitement of the fire drill and a very exciting day. And the question, put simply, is what is it that you think that the three governments can do as a region to elevate both the understanding of environmental justice, the process and practice of dealing respectfully with environmental justice communities, but also taking action and creating tools that can help not only environmental justice communities be more effective in dealing with the issues that afflict their communities, but in helping the agencies become more effective in initiating and integrating this thinking into all the work that they do. I will say that from the earlier discussions we've had today, I already have half a page of little notes and writing of really good ideas that our panelists and our public speakers at the microphone had raised, both at the microphone but also during the breaks. And I'd like us to be able to continue that now. Our TEK expert group members are now having their meeting. We had ours early in the morning before we started. But in consultation, considering how we've run out of time, we've decided we'd rather start with your suggestions first for what we ought to consider putting our advice to the ministers, and then I'll turn to my colleagues on the JPAC for their deliberation and thought. So anyone who has suggestions for us for what the three countries can do together to elevate their own work and to elevate the work and enable the work in communities to develop respectful relationships with the communities. Again, thinking of is how to do things with people, not for them or to them. Really. Well, you had something? Thank you. And if you please state your name and remind us, even if you've talked before.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is James Hopkins. I'm a law professor at the University of Arizona. A quick, I guess, question, suggestion. I'm trying to make this as feasible and doable as possible, but it would be great if everyone, every citizen within the NAFTA member countries could read a document that tells them what the maximum exposure level is for agreed upon chemicals. I'll just pick, in my case, having litigated in Mexico, I'll pick DDTs just as an easy example. I mean, I know it's a joke that Canada uses metric and the Americans don't, but that's actually the unit of measurement is different. So I'm not saying ask the countries to change their system of measurement, but if they could actually just articulate it into the value of the other country, but it gets more complicated. So for example, Mexico measures maximum exposure levels of DDTs collectively amongst 6 of the DDTs, not a singular one. So the number is remarkably low. So it looks on the face of it that they have a higher threshold, that they have more stringent environmental controls, but that's not the case once you do the math. So, and I think those are relevant because we're talking about environmental justice today. And so we've learned how people live varies from community to community. And for particular groups that are disenfranchised, that are marginalized, that experience systemic racism, they live in a different relationship with many of those chemicals that we often take for granted in the larger population. And so that would be of great value. I think it's doable.
I think that's great.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes, you can, Bob.
If possible, that resonates with me because early on, when the CEC was first created, that was a key issue for the 3 countries and states and provinces in the 3 nations. There were different standards. Mercury was another one. There were different standards for mercury. So if you were an air modeler and you were trying to look at air issues, you couldn't aggregate the information or even model it because it was not harmonized. So the harmonization, whether it's completely harmonized or partially with some form of conversion, is entirely consistent with what I've seen occur in the past on various issues. Now, I'm not as proficient in DDT as you are, so I don't know how exactly that might apply, but the concept is, I think, a valuable concept and something that we should always be striving for, since we all share one region of the world.
Thank you. And it reminds me of one other strategic point of this idea of sharing one world. You can't enforce local regulations or even domestic regulations. But for example, the province of Ontario 2 weeks ago announced that it had cut, as in closed, its wastewater treatment testing program, which has an enormous impact on the North Shore of Lake Huron, just as a random example. So it would be great if there was a website or something to go to kind of create a basic floorboard of standards. And that's a sign that I've used up all my time, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Could I just suggest that you're here tomorrow and Paulo gets here, that you huddle with him as well, because having dealt with toxic release inventory and in Mexico, he spent years dealing with this translation on toxicity. I think that'd be a great conversation to have. I think it's a good idea. Similarly, I've been asked by people in a totally different topic that in terms of the CEC, like, could we do a summary of different water rules, water rights rules and all that, access to it, so people could see how differently not just the countries, but the states actually manage water flow. Again, those compilations being helpful both to give community members and others, academics, everybody, access to a quicker way than everybody looking it up themselves over and over again, but also laying a foundation for having an interesting conversation about why do you do it that way? And have you thought about doing it that way? So that everybody gets better through the ability to lay a foundation to have those kinds of conversations. So thank you. Good.
Hi. Leticia Zavala with El Futuro Es Nuestro. It's it's a nonprofit here in North Carolina. We're a farm worker rights group. And I think that it's really important that when we talk about environmental justice, we talk about the enforcement of labor rights for workers, especially in agriculture. North Carolina brings in thousands of farm workers from Mexico every year. They get exposed to pesticides. They live in housing that is surrounded by hog waste, drinking water that is polluted, and there's no protections for them. And I think it's very important. They're leaving their country that's probably got some of the same issues to come here, and nobody's addressing them. Last year, we had 3 workers that passed away due to the heat, right? There's no enforcement. There's really no protections on heat. There are no protections on heat. And the few protections that exist are not enforced, right? Jose Arturo, which was the worst case that we saw last year, he had been in North Carolina for 1 week. He was 32 years old. And the night before he died, he said, I don't feel well. I don't think I'm going to work. And the supervisor said, if you don't go to work, you're not coming back next year. And he went to work. In the morning, he said, I don't feel well. My head hurts. And the supervisor said, that's how everybody feels the first week. You feel like you're going to die, but you don't die. But he did die, right? He was in the field. After he passed out in the middle of the sweet potato field, beside his sweet potato bucket, he was there for 40 minutes before somebody called the ambulance to come and provide service for him. We still do not have a death certificate that states the cause of his death 8 months later, right? These are issues that need to be addressed. We can't talk about environmental justice if we don't talk about labor justice and the people that are harvesting the crops that are being exposed by chemicals, by the same companies that are polluting our lands. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well said.
Alicia, could I make a comment?
Please do.
My family were farm workers. I come from a small village outside of Phoenix called Guadalupe. And most of the Yaqui and Mexican families that lived in Guadalupe at that time, well, I'm a senior now, an elder. They all were farm laborers, farm workers. And during the summer, of course, Arizona gets immensely hot. And as a child, I remember working, picking potatoes, picking onions, harvesting season for those crops that were produced during the summer. And at that time, there were no laws with regards to the workers. And it was much later in life that I was asked to be part of farm worker justice because of what they were trying to do nationally with regards to those laws that protected farm workers. And they still carry on that important policy work and lobby work and advocacy work. In Arizona, I know that the city of Phoenix has already passed laws, policies there for their workers because it's extremely hot in Phoenix. The city of Tucson is also engaging on what can we do to protect the workers, those that work in the heat or warehouses. So yes, this is a crisis that we're all dealing with, and look at what's happening now in our country with this heat wave and what's happening here in North Carolina. So thank you for bringing this to this forum, to this time. It's very important, and thank you.
Yeah, very good. Please. Yeah. Oh, there's one over there.
Hello, how's it going? Hi, my name is Jessica Lee, and I live and work in California. I am a young professional. I just want to say thank you to CEC for coordinating this great event. And my question to you is, and this is regarding youth participation, what can the three countries do to help youth understand the importance of knowing the necessary environmental laws, the legal standards, and the implications while the youth are fighting for environmental justice and advocating for environmental justice, so that the youth are able to minimize their liabilities and be able to navigate the spaces safely? Thank you.
Can you help me understand a little bit?
Yes.
Maybe I didn't hear it that well. It's just I just don't hear that well. Which is the navigate which spaces safer?
Navigate the spaces of climate action, environmental action, and fighting for environmental justice.
So understanding the making it easier to understand and more accessible to understand the standards and the rules.
Yes, because when we talk about youth, some of them may still be in high schools or they're in elementary schools and middle schools. So they may not be able to acquire the legal understandings to help them navigate these participatory spaces that well. And how are youth at that age level and that understanding be able to protect themselves? And what can the community members do to collaborate with the governments in raising awareness of that?
Right. So in some ways, let's see if I understand it. This is interesting. And I think I have part of that as a concept already in something that was said earlier, which is how to help folks in general too, but particularly with a focus on youth, understand sort of the rights and the standards to which everybody is entitled in an intelligible, understandable way, as opposed to the way we as environmental lawyers write it for other lawyers, or the way regulators write it for other regulators, so that in essence, everyone has more democratic access to what it is that everyone should be entitled to. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense.
Right. No, I think that's important. I do think this translation aspect, and I think great environmental educators are really good at it, but sometimes that stuff is too simple and too simplistic, and there's something that could empower and enable folks who are younger, junior high, high school, et cetera, to be able to engage more productively in the system rather than coming in and having either a simple knowledge or no knowledge and being patted on the head. So the issue of empowering, I would say all people, but particularly with an emphasis on youth, helps everybody, because then we just have more people in a democratic society or democratic societies who actually understand and have access to it, because that is an issue that happens where people get disenfranchised because government hasn't put out information in a clear and understandable way. And so when people do come to express, sorry, this is the bias of a CEQA lawyer, right, or NEPA lawyer from early on, they don't get their shot at the conversation because they come in and make a comment to which the governmental agency say, well, that's wrong, it's actually this. And then the person never gets that other chance to actually comment on an issue based on the rules as they are. Am I getting that right? Great. I think it's a great idea. Thank you. Hi. Yeah, just we're not. I've looked at what time it is. We're okay. No need to rush. Oops.
¿Sí? ¿Sí?
Yeah, there we are.
Muy bien, gracias.
Hi, my name is Jose, and I speak representing a project that We Are Water. It's a project between Mexico and Canada, indigenous communities between Mexico and Canada for hydraulic. And the comment that I wanted to make, and the question that I have is, I don't know if it's communications or initiatives that show that the three countries have the policies and the actions, and the economy of the three countries has consequences in the three countries. The example that I want to give you is that I lived in Canada for 5 years, and nobody told me of the Canadian mining. I didn't know anything about Canadian mining, and until I arrived in Mexico, they told me the Canadian mines are so bad in Canada as they are here. And in Mexico, everybody knows about the Canadian mining, like we saw this morning. So I would like to propose a series of communications or initiatives that provide more attention to that the economy of Canada, the well-being of Canada is for the suffering of Mexico, and the same with the monarch butterfly. They pay attention in this connection of ecosystems to put attention to the connection of economies and inequalities like mining or fisheries or the topic of water, but like an awakening, because I feel that we can put pressure in the country of origin of those countries, of those companies, I'm sorry, and in Canada, put more pressure with regards to policies, legislation, and economy. That's a comment in question.
I think it's a good comment. I think there have actually been CEC, sorry, I have two of these on here, CEC projects that that have illustrated those things. It was more under the article that's no longer there, but like the lead acid battery reports and work that the CEC did based on folks' request illuminated that industry, and there'll be a follow-on announcement of a new report later by the CEC on that. So it's a good suggestion to illuminate any number of those issues. So keep the suggestions coming because we can suggest them.
Mm-hmm.
One of it's not even a hidden gem, one of the gems of the CEC, which until I was appointed, I didn't know about all of this either. We've done a lot to try and illuminate the great work that the CEC can do. Is the hidden gem is the Secretariat, where folks do those submission factual records that Paolo was talking about. But there are a mass of great reports there that don't get the play they need because it's very hard to get the media play on reports like this. But it's of intense value, again, to people who then can research them and find them and use them. So good suggestion. Other suggestions from the floor? Thank you.
Hola, buenas tardes. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much to the CEC for putting this on. I have a question, and honestly, I want to piggyback a little bit off of what Leticia mentioned, and I'm so sorry, I'm terrible with it because I always forget to introduce myself, but my name is Yesenia Cuello. I'm with NC Field. It stands for North Carolina Focused on Increasing Education, Leadership, and Dignity. And we're also a nonprofit organization that's based here in North Carolina. We're an organization, I'm sorry? Thank you. I appreciate it. Those are the three pillars that we stand on. But so we're an organization that's based here in North Carolina, founded by farm workers for farm workers. And one of the issues that we encounter with community empowerment and mobilization, and especially with working with marginalized communities, is addressing their needs before we address our own. So how do we bring in the dignity aspect of knowing that we need storytelling, knowing that we need advocacy, knowing that the best people to do that work are the people that are closest to the issue, but needing to address their issues before they are mentally stable enough to be able to do some of that work. I think one of the examples that I shared earlier is, maybe a mother that's going through some of these issues around environmental injustice, is worried about feeding her children. And it's unrealistic to expect her to be able to go do advocacy whenever she's worried and stress-stricken with, feeding her children. And one of the things that I wanted to uplift is, the fact that what's happening here is a really amazing thing, because we're starting with listening to community members. And I feel like that's the best way whenever we have solutions that are not only focused on specific communities, but are truly community-led and community-driven. The issue that I want to uplift is that H-2A temporary agricultural worker visa holders in the United States experience disparate impact due to the lack of accurate and accessible 911 addresses. So what this means is that a lot of the farm worker labor housing, and to be honest, not only in North Carolina, but across the nation, does not have an address associated with the geographic information system that emergency services or emergency service providers use in order to be able to find people in situations of an emergency. So like the example that Leticia referenced earlier, that even if a farm worker was at their, farm worker labor housing, had they called 911, would emergency services have gotten there in time in order to be able to provide emergency rescue services? And the fact is that a lot of them don't. So that is one of the ones that I wanted to reference, because not only does it pose an issue with organizations trying to get information and resources to these marginalized groups, but also hard to make sure that we're being inclusive of their voice and their story and their reality and the solutions that we're trying to, or the issues that we're trying to solve. Thank you.
Well, it's a terrible situation, but that's a really great point. Thank you. Thank you.
Soy Ramón Jicotencat o Jico Murrieta, Xico, from Mexico and living in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And I've been an environmental consultant in both countries. And I think the TEMEC countries, which used to be NAFTA, have a great task to do or to cooperate among the three homogeneously, because the three countries are not homogeneous. They have two legal systems. The US is British system of laws and regulations, and Mexico is the Roman system of regulation, and they both are totally different. And I'm not quite sure about how it is in Canada, whether it's the two mixed or something like that. And also there are three languages in this institution. And there are two measurement units. There was a question about that, I think, before. But that's not a great problem to solve, the last one. The practice, I mean, in Mexico is usually, depending what you're measuring, is water, is soil, air. The maximum allowable limits differ. It's not just one. And also in Mexico, the environmental issues are separated from human health issues. Human health issues is handled by the health ministry. and environmental is Semarnat. So that also brings some problems for Mexicans and also for Temec, because they are, I mean, the study of the environment is the protection of humans and biological items. But for Semarnat, it's just plants and, I mean, it's biological beings and non-biological beings. And for the health ministry, it's just humans, human health. And the standards are set up by for humans, like breathing polluted air is the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Health, and the emission of those pollutants in an industry is Semarnat if it is a federal jurisdiction, that plant. If it is not federal, it's either state or municipality. So all of that has to come together so that the three countries with those three different systems have to come together so that the three work together when one to get one or several goals. So that's one issue, and also the way that the Mexican applies the regulation or enforces is different than the enforcement in the U.S. Right. Because in Mexico is very well defined whether it is federal, state, or municipality. Whereas in the US, the EPA creates the regulation and the states enforce the regulation.
And they add their own.
Yeah, and their own, yeah. But usually the practice at the state level, they can emit or create their own above the EPA. Yeah. Yeah, but not lower. The same in Mexico. So I just wanted to make that comment because it's not easy. I mean, it can be done, but it'll take time, and we don't have time. So it is a task that I think it can be one thing that the institutions, both the three countries can do is to have what we say in Spanish, extension, the extension, and the people from these three institutions go to the people to explain more than trying to create a new system, to explain how the three countries work, and in that way, the population will know that it's not so easy, so they can understand, and probably they will not be so desperate to get a result, because I in the 90s I took a course in Mexico in the port of Guaymas in the state of Sonora about making environmental laws. And that was people from EPA going to the state of Sonora in Mexico to teach us that. And that was a great, more than creating laws, to me, it was more as to how to interpret those laws and those regulations. So talks like that help a lot to politicians, help a lot to technicians, and people from NGOs and all that. So I just.
They can be very helpful. I think that part of the challenge that we have, and then I want to turn to the JPAC numbers because we only have about 10 minutes left, is choosing which things can yield the most benefit with everyone's precious time. And I appreciate that you went through the difference in the rules and measurement, but didn't suggest that we spend a lot of time trying to make it one system, but figure out how to educate people so at least they know what other options are when we can. So I think that's actually quite helpful. And I know this is totally off base, but I have to, oh, please go ahead if you'd like to, Reverend. And as you're walking up, this is highly non-technical, but you have to Google the YouTube of Nate Bargatze talking about weights and measures if you're interested in how differently our countries, different countries measure things, because it's, if you're a geek, it's hilarious. So that's my tip for you today. Reverend.
Thank you again for allowing me to be here to share our story.
Honored you're here.
And our story was that everyday people found their individual voices, found a collective voice, and found allies to stand up with them against the injustice. So looking at your theme, strengthening environmental justice, I like to add communities, through community empowerment, through helping communities find their power, their voice. And I would hope that there would be an awesome social marketing strategy to show us our three nations, we're closer than we think. I call it the drone perspective. One of our filmmakers used a drone in my community to show us our community from elevated place. And I saw that my neighbors were much closer to me than I thought because the trees were barriers. And those who want power play us against one another. They create borders, they create policies, us against them. And if you could give us three nations a drone observation of how close we are as nations, and that each of us, we're dealing with different circumstances, but we have a voice. We have a collective voice, and we have allies that crosses borders. So what is our strategy for community empowerment? What are those strategies we want to use to counter the narratives that create us to work against ourselves? So hopefully there'll be a great social marketing that includes individual stories, individual achievements, focus on positive things that are happening, and that we're all so much similar. Even though we're working in different structures, we are really connected. We're part of a greater community that's been divided by those who want power. So I would hope that there will be a strategy about what are we going to do to bring down these barriers that make us think we're so far apart, and strategies that have been put in place to keep us fighting among ourselves while those who want more wealth and power take advantage of us. So thank you.
Thank you. That's very well said. I do think the forces of disempowerment are strong, and that the stories that many of you have mentioned through the course of the day of power and strength and what communities can do, those stories themselves have power. And if you can couple it with data that's accessible, it's even more powerful. So thank you, because I heard that a lot through the different talks earlier today, and I had written down some form of that, but that was very well said and inspirational. Thank you. And then I will ask you all not to be, we want to hear from you, but I want to make sure I have a little time for my colleagues to at least have some final words before we then deliberate on these things.
Yeah, no, don't worry. I'm going to be really brief. Also, is it okay if I speak in Spanish?
Yeah, we
Okay.
have these things on.
I would like to answer the question that you posed at the beginning. How do we see the environmental justice from a North American perspective, and also looking at your mandate on how the TEK can provide some input to the parties and the work of the CEC. I have some very specific suggestions when I listen to all the discussions going on. At an international level, we are talking about a region, and there are synergy points where we can start talking speaking the same language, and continue driving environmental justice in international fora. we can elevate at a political level as a region, and this is specifically as a connector in this region, and support the CEC to become a data creator or information creator on solutions, and we can be a creator of technical inputs for international bodies, for example, and have some joint visions and perspectives under the United Nations Summit for Climate Change. A couple of weeks ago, we started negotiating work for adaptation indicators for the global adaptation framework. How the North American region looks at these indicators. How are we going to measure climate adaptation, and how are we going to include environmental justice? We can work on that area together, and we can continue with the same scope at all working group levels. And in the domestic arena, we can empower communities. This is something we do, and we can strengthen the programs and the grants that are provided, generate local leaders, and especially in more vulnerable communities, we can create partnerships with international organizations or local organizations that are already working in the communities, and also strengthening capabilities. We have heard that we lack some capabilities, and this is something we can generate under this framework. And these are just some ideas, and we have the opportunity to coordinate and collaborate to advance in the global challenges that have local implications. So thank you very much.
So it dovetails with some stuff that I was planning to say tomorrow, so to the ministers, so thank you. Very helpful.
One thing that we've talked a lot today about the role that Indigenous people play in protecting biodiversity and environmental health. And one issue that I think really stands in the way of that, especially in the United States, is the federal recognition system. You'll have to forgive me, I don't know to what degree that's an issue in the other two countries, though I'm sure they have their own bureaucracies that stand in the way of Indigenous people doing the good work that they do. But in terms of access to power, resources, legal rights, the federal recognition system really stands in the way of our Indigenous tribes doing the work that they need to.
Very true. Happy to talk to you about that later a little bit. Thanks for raising it.
And my colleague did not introduce herself. That's Dr. Danny Lynn Hunter with the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network. And I'm following behind her. I'm Valerie Ann Johnson, also with the network, to give an example of maybe a pathway to address some of the issues, not all of them. And that is in the earlier part of this month, one of our Indigenous tribes hosted, and it was called the Yesa Tribunal. It's the first time an Indigenous group led this tribunal, and it was indicting the Mountain Valley Pipeline. And it was using the language of the international rights of nature, and they were talking about the ways in which all our relations were being impacted by what was happening with the pipeline. And it was going through West Virginia, and even though it was stopped by the Occaneechi Saponi here in North Carolina, it didn't mean that they gave up. They, in fact, held this tribunal so that we could bring to the international court, and I'm not speaking for the tribe, but I would suggest that folk look at that as a pattern, that tribunal that was just held this month, because the next step, of course, Mountain Valley Pipeline was found guilty. There were expert testimony from a variety of people. It was very intersectional. But the importance was we were following the lead of our Indigenous people to tell us how we should go about addressing the issue. So if we listen and we pay attention, we have direction to go. And so in September, this will go in front of the international court. and it has to do with protecting our rivers. So this is one way in which we all have rivers in our countries. There are ways in which we can look at that. And I just wanted to highlight that a little bit. So thank you.
Thank you. I think illuminating that is, and to be thinking about it is important. It's interesting how within, for example, a government structure domestically, there are issues that folks get in the weeds of, and it becomes very difficult to think bigger. And yet, I've been spending time thinking about this with a group I'm a part of. At the international level, you can sometimes get through on an issue that a regular person would think was obvious, that can't get through the system, and that idea. Sorry, that's just telling me we're out of time, and we'll beg for a little bit to roll out. That way you could all hear we were out of time, so it wasn't just me saying it. But so it's a concept that we've been playing with, and the UN actually likes it and wants us to do more to talk about the value of scaffolding. The idea, for example, an example being the Human Right to Water Declaration, no force, yet the power of an idea, which led to California passing the Human Right to Water. Again, policy, no force, but it has led to 10 years of more legislation and more action on the ground that ever would have happened without the power of that statement. And similarly, I think in particular, the Icha community and the indigenous communities have done a remarkable job using the international systems, whether the COP system meetings or the different UN processes. And here, this is another great example to illuminate an issue, and I love the rights of nature issue as well. That's a powerful idea that some people may poo-poo at first. But when you step back like a regular person, as opposed to thinking about all the ways it's going to be hard to convince your state legislator or a federal legislator to do something about it, and you talk to a regular person, they go, well, of course. So figuring out how we can get closer to that common sense human connection to each other and to nature that people have talked about through the course of the day is more of a challenge than it should be, as so many of us professionalize ourselves as engineers or lawyers or whatever into being the high priests and priestesses of some system that can make us so smart we're stupid, and we lose sight of that very human set of things. So thanks, that's a great example. State recognized, not federally recognized. Yeah, another good, amazing point. Well, I thank you. We could keep going, but I want to just give my colleagues, we had decided we wanted to hear from you all rather than running out of time. But if any of my colleagues want to add anything here in public, even though we'll keep talking about it later. Yes, yeah.
All your interventions have been very enriching, and also all the examples that you have provided in terms of the information that can be created, sharing certain issues issues and challenges we are all facing. And now we're talking about environmental justice. Environmental justice has taken decades, but I did not have any information about environmental justice before this session. We are also experiencing huge problems related to this topic in the region where I come from. It really called my attention that one of the obstacles that have worsened the enforcement of environmental justice laws is the enforcing the international treaties that we already have to enforce environmental justice. And for instance, the Supreme Court in Mexico, which is an authority at a federal level, has issued orders for the cultivation of soybean and transgenic maize in our the Yucatan Peninsula. However, the reality is something different. Transgenic soybean is being grown as well as transgenic maize, and it has a negative impact for the human food, and also for the intensive use of pesticides, glyphosate, and some other things related to pesticides that has killed millions of bees. And as I pointed out in my previous intervention, the agricultural communities in the peninsula and also in Yucatan and Oaxaca and in the Isthmus, they also have beekeeping as one of their main activities. It has had a negative impact as well. And not the non-enforcement of these laws that are already there, but we have to work with the social fabric of the community to make these laws enforceable and to enforce the orders for stopping the cultivation of transgenic soybean and maize, and has affected our fauna and flora. So we have to create networks, have a common front. As Mexico, we are a diverse country. The different regions of our country are facing similar problems. This is the problem that we all face in all regions, which is the non-enforcement of domestic laws and we have had a negative impact in our Mayan community. So thank you very much for all your contributions. And also, it's important to learn the realities in the different regions in North Carolina and other regions in the US, and also Canada, that is currently facing issues as well. So I'm very thankful for learning so much in this session and for also sharing our problems so we can create this common front and address the problems and create solutions from community-based solutions point of view.
Octaviana, last words.
Thank you all for engaging with us. Your voice, I think the collective energy in this room and why we're here is important for Mother Earth. And you know, the theme environmental justice is something that really hits home for many of us. So thank you for your comments. We hear you, and we want to work with you. And again, we look forward to more of the discussions, the comments that you bring to us, and certainly we learn from all of you.
Thank you.
Right. Whoops. My final comments would be, first of all, that I think it's important to recognize that we have made a lot of progress. As someone that has been out there working in local communities and then at a state and regional level and a federal level and an international level, I've been fortunate to experience a lot of collaboration and a lot of steps taken that have addressed issues. That isn't to say that we don't have a huge challenge in front of us. There is much, much more to do. But sometimes we're so caught up in everything else we need to be doing that we don't stop and smell the roses for a moment and recognize that we have achieved a great deal. And we don't have enough time today. I could spend 2 hours running through examples of that. With that said, I think the comment that we heard from the Reverend was spot on for me. My background was in community planning and revitalization when I came out of graduate school. And I worked at the local level, and I worked with local communities to engage with me, and we created committees. At one point, I remember a town that only had a few thousand people, a rural town, had 500 people at the at the elementary school basketball court where we had our first meeting, and we divided up into committees and worked together. And I sort of followed that model with community after community to build a consensus within the community of what they wanted it to be, what was important to them, how things were interrelated. And not only did we just wait for people to show up or join the group, but we actually sought out people. We sought out people who maybe wouldn't come normally, but we knew that having them involved in the process, even some that maybe locally were considered troublemakers, we would seek them out and bring them inside the process and have them involved. And in the end of the day, we found that people tended to support what they helped create. And that fundamental concept carries through in so many of these issues that we're talking about. And building that local base and that local level with all age groups, all income groups, all ways of life and all goes a long way. And as we look at these challenges, whether it's you're calling it environmental justice or environmental equity, the first policy that I prepared and signed as a state environmental commissioner was environmental equity. And we began doing it. We didn't have a law. We had it as a policy, and we started to implement it. And we didn't wait for some debate in the legislature to, have people grandstanding and saying what it wasn't or whatever. And we just did it. And when I went to EPA, we did policies that I didn't check. As you know, sometimes with the head of the EPA, we just did the right thing and we moved forward. And I'm not suggesting that we all are, rebels out there. But the point here is that people sometimes forget how much they can do. And you don't need to wait for people somewhere else to solve the problem for you. And I know that many of you know that and you're involved already. That's why you're here. But please continue to do that. And the one-on-one, the direct communication, so much of our communication now is with emails and texts and social media where misinformation is easily spread. And that becomes very, very difficult and adds to the challenge, frankly. So getting people to be in person, to be communicating, to look people in the eye and recruit people from all walks of life to be part of the process, I think is really the key. And once you do that, everything becomes so much easier. So just a general statement, I have much, much more I could be saying specifically about environmental justice and equity, but I really appreciate everyone being here and how much you care. And it also reinforces the notion that we have much more to do and much more to do on a tri-national basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And before I hand it back to our chair to both give his thoughts and close out the meetings, just a short, again, a thank you. I've already used all my letters, used enough words already, but just to say how gratifying this is that you've been willing to spend the time with us. I just finished teaching a seminar on how to build alliances for water justice that was both about tribal and about environmental justice work. And our work in the class was trying to help folks understand how to be a good ally. You don't get to call yourself an ally, someone else says you're an ally, but how to try and be a good ally with respect and with humility in figuring out. And I just want to thank you for helping us think about how we can help the CEC be the most effective ally to help communities on the ground where they are and with their families and their lives and what they dream on and what they hope for in their local communities, that even an international consortium of 3 nations can do things that can lay a foundation for other people being more effective through recognition, through sharing information, through doing what I think national and international organizations have an obligation, but a little more flexibility to be able to do, because they're just a trifle bit further away than state and local government, which is to give voice to people who don't get a voice at home. And so thank you again for helping us, with all humility, try and grapple with how we can add value in this arena to people and empower them through the various tools at our disposal. So thank you again for your time with that. I'll turn it over to our chair for his thoughts as a member of the JPAC, as well as closing us out.
Bueno, antes de continuar en este tenor de
Before continuing in this question that was asked, and with the moderation of Felicia, I am convinced after listening today to the different experiences, great learnings, I believe that it is possible to build this environmental justice from the North American perspective. I believe that we can start with very fixed issues. I remember that the European Union is asking for some people from the food sector at a world level, products that are imported from zero deforestation. And there are some raw materials that are produced in Latin America and Mexico, like coffee, like lumber. And so that is a great concern for the producers. So I think that we have identified some market issues that could be the beginning to start exploring. There are negative issues like mining, but why not start with positive issues? In my case, I have worked with coffee. The coffee that is produced in Mexico is the shade coffee, very different from other countries that produce sun coffee and that have agrochemicals. And why not start with these crops, like coffee that protects the soil, captures water, protects biodiversity, captures carbon, and it is produced by small indigenous communities. Why not start to stimulate? If we talk about socio-environmental justice, we should start with these experiences. Cecia already mentioned this in the case of honey. We can start exploring how can we change this market, like I was mentioning, that has taken us to an socio-environmental injustice. I think that there's a lot of work, but we have very important opinions. To thank Felicia for her moderation, to thank Bob, Octaviana, Cecia for your comments, and in general, thanks to all. We are at the end of our session, and I would like to express my sincere thanks to our guest panelists, in person and virtual because of the problems that we mentioned, all the members of the JPAC, those who are in person, and to all of you who have joined us today, like Luis Alfonso and the colleagues from Canada, and also to all of you who are here today. And like we mentioned during the day, your feedback is of great importance for us and will be instrumental in preparing our recommendations to the Council. I would also like to thank the Secretariat staff for their great support, hard work, and dedication, and of course, to the interpreters over there and technical staff in charge of these details. As you know, our session today is part of the activities that will be held over the next 2 days, culminating with the public session of the Council on Wednesday afternoon. For those of you joining us in person, we invite you tomorrow, starting at 9 o'clock Eastern Time, to visit the CEC exhibit, which is located outside this room. And of course, all the members of the public, including our online participants, to the morning segment of presentations on the work of the CEC, starting with improving air quality for environmental justice. And the North American PRTR initiative, which will include a demonstration on the Unbalanced online website and database. These sessions will begin at 11 o'clock Eastern Time. There will also be 2 afternoon activities starting at 1400 hours. A youth panel entitled Bridging the Gap, a conversation on generational struggle for environmental justice, a specialist roundtable with the CEC's executive director entitled Environmental Justice, Origins, Evolution, and Emerging Policies in North America. This roundtable at 16 hours, 4 o'clock, and for those joining us in person, tomorrow evening, the official opening of the 31st regular session of the CEC Council will take place at 18:15 hours Eastern. On Wednesday morning, starting at 9 o'clock Eastern, in-person participants will be able to continue visiting the CEC exhibit, and starting at 10 a.m., online participants can join to hear about CEC's work under the Environmental Equity and Climate Resilience Grants Program, EJ4 Climate, and the Communities for Environmental Justice Network. And beginning at 13:30 hours, the public segment of the council session will begin under the theme Strengthening Environmental Justice Through Community Empowerment. As part of our efforts to improve our events, we would be very grateful to answer a brief survey by clicking on the QR code that appears on the screens, and it's also displayed in different sections of the room and outside. Thank you to all of you for your attendance, for your participation, and we will see you tomorrow. Thank you.